lecture after that. And then again, I will try to stop about 15 minutes before the lecture ends and answer any further questions that you might have. And I hope you have a lot of questions. Um, Along with uh, Prita's very sophisticated pedagogy, I was also happy that she introduced to us data from South Asian languages like Magahi, Bangla, and Maithili. I have been speaking with Prita for some time, and I'm just very happy to learn about these languages. When you look at the development of genitive grammar from the 1950s onto today, you notice that certain languages have played a central role in developing of the theory of that particular time. So standard theory of 50s and 60s, English was central to the development. Okay, and with extended standard theory and into GB, English continued to play a central role, but also languages like Italian, being represented today by Robata, played a very, very major role. Wonderful Italian linguists like Luigi Rizzi, Cinque, came on the scene. Chinese had a role to play as well with Jim Huang's 1982 MIT dissertation when people are talking about the empty category principle. And so primarily English, but with Italian and a little bit of Chinese. And in early minimalism, again, English mixed with a little bit of Icelandic was the sort of the showcase data to develop a lot of the concepts that we are familiar with. But today, minimalism, what we are finding is an explosion of diversity of data, in part because of the fact that people are now really concerned with agreement. And we see people, English for this is not very helpful because English has such impoverished agreement system. But Romance, Germanic, a lot of languages that Amy Deal, for example, Nespas, really exciting data that we are seeing now. So we are seeing quite a widening of the view of language from what used to be basically English to now a much larger body of data. Still not big enough, in my opinion, but I'm very happy to see this. And in terms of the kind of topic that we're talking about today, the SAP, the treetops, and so forth, languages in South Asia, as we saw from Prita, is going to be absolutely critical. The kinds of questions that Prita was asking with allocutive and the kind of regular kind of agreement, honorific agreement, those are questions that you cannot even ask in most languages, including English. So English is not always helpful in this domain. Asian languages, as I'll show you, are also helpful. And thanks to the work of people like Roberta, Italian Romance is also very interesting. And thanks to the work of people like Virginia Hill and Lillian Hegman, languages such as Romanian have become very, very important. So there's a shift in not only the topics that we study, but accompanying that is the attention that we're paying to the kinds of languages that we depend on for developing the concepts. And there's been a shift, at least in this domain, okay, into languages that have not played a big role in generative grammar. Uh, but now, as you know, as we did go into this territory, more and more languages, I think, are going to be represented, just as we see with five-feature agreement, that's sort of exploding the database of what we know about human language. So I think this is a wonderful, wonderful development. And I thank uh, New Delhi, IIT New Delhi, Prita, and her team for hosting this and for allowing me to talk with you. So let me then go ahead and get started with my talk. As I said, I'll talk for about 45 minutes and then or 40 minutes, and then I will stop and try to answer any questions that you post on chat, or you can ask me directly. Okay. Oops. Just get some things out of my. Okay, so the title is From Proposition to Elocution, Development of the Treetop Structure in Syntactic Theory. I use the term treetop as a shorthand for referring to all of the structure that you saw in Prita's lecture above the CP. Okay. If you have any questions beyond today, here is my email address, so feel free to contact me. So a basic question that a lot of people have been asking is, what is language designed for? Okay, let me just move. Okay. Um, so there are sort of two major views, opposing views, competing views on what language is designed for. One, the one that we're familiar with, is language is designed to represent thought. Its use for communication is secondary and derivative. Chomsky, Hinson, Pinker is in this group, many, many others, many, many others. So this is sort of the generative grammarian's view of human language. Okay. But there's also an opposing view that is widely adopted, and that is that language is designed for communication in social context. People like Brunner, Levinson, Tomasello, these are major, major figures in this approach to language. Believe that human language is all about communication in social contexts. Okay. Uh, my uh, sort of purpose in studying the treetops, the number of purposes, but one is that it's the claim that at its core, CP, language represents thought, but syntax also plays a role in the actual use of language in communication, and that's the treetop structure. Okay. We see this in pretest work. Manfred Krifka, whose work I depend on quite heavily. Some of my work, Portner, Pack, and Zanutini, in their very famous 2019 language article, Sigerson, Spicenteni, that you heard about, Wilshko, Martina, who will be lecturing. Yamada is 2019 is a Georgetown dissertation supervised by Paul Portner, and it's a very fine dissertation on this topic. Uh, Raffaele Zannettini, 2008, one of the early papers after Spicentini that argued that there has to be a higher structure above the CP. She was particularly looking at imperatives and argued that there has to be something that we would today call the addressee projection above the CP that goes with the imperatives. So there's been lots of good work. More and more people are coming into this field, which is a good sign. So the two views of what human language is designed for, uh, we find in the early work by Chomsky, he split language into competence and performance. Uh, Competence is the core linguistic ability. It's possessed by the individual, not society. And that's a key notion. The idea is that language competence resides in each individual in our brain. Okay? For many people, that means that there is a core of competence that is biologically, okay, endowed in all humans. That's competence. Uh, Performance refers to the use of language in the actual world. And for those who view language in this way, language, at least in part, resides in society, not within our biological boundary within us. Again, people such as Brunner, Tomasello Levinson, very, very distinguished scholars in this area. Okay, so competence and performance. Okay? And this is a duality that you actually find commonly in other fields. For example, biology. Uh, so the two views come down to either trying to characterize language by the form that it takes universally, which is competence, or by its function. Okay, form. This is what generative grammarians are really concerned with. You know, what kind of form? What kind of tree structure? Okay, what is the form of agreement? What is the form of movement? Okay? We are very, very concerned with the details of what a syntactic structure looks like. But others see language as its function. And so people like Levinson, for example, study how we use language in society. And he found, for example, that turn takings, question answer, these quick turn takings that we do all the time, we do that like 1,500 times a day. And most of the turn takings conversations last for about 2 seconds. So we are literally talking on top of each other. And we do that 1,500 times, which seems like a lot. But I just recently ran across this study that every day we touch our smartphone screen 2,000 times, 2,000 times. Just when you're trying to find something, you tap the screen like 10 times, tap, 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 tap. And so 2,000 times. So when you see that, 1,500 time turn takings per day doesn't seem all that out of place. Okay? So two very different approaches to language. And when you see this kind of dichotomy, I turn to this quote by Stephen Jay Gould, a brilliant evolutionary biologist who taught at Harvard, who said that formalism and functionalism represent poles of a timeless dichotomy, each expressing a valid way of representing reality. Both poles can only be regarded as deeply right, and each needs the other. If one pole wins for contingent reasons of a transient historical moment, then the advantage can only be temporary and intellectually limited. Okay? You can see how this could come out from a biologist, right? Because a biological entity has both structure, okay? like your brain, but also it has function as it interacts with the environment. Okay? And we're seeing exactly the same thing with human language. It's just right now the two poles are kind of split apart with a deep line in the sand. And my sort of modest suggestion is that maybe we can take up this Stephen Gould's suggestion and try to bring the two together. Martina has a wonderful quote along this line. If grammatical knowledge, which defines human language, equally configures the language of thought as well as the language of interaction, it follows that human-specific language must be a vehicle for both thought and communication, and hence the dichotomy dissolves. Okay? Uh, this is a, very, very interesting and insightful idea. The idea, if I understand Martina's suggestion, is that the original dichotomy that Chomsky put forth between competence and performance may not be so clear cut with a clear line drawn between. Maybe the distinction is fuzzier than we thought. And this is what I'm going to suggest. And so a small step towards unification is the treetop structure, as suggested by a number of people. And today I'm going to be motivating a particular approach to treetop structure with data from languages such as Basque, Japanese, a little bit of Magahi that you've already seen from Prita's lecture, a reference to language of autistic children, children on the spectrum. I'm not going to have a chance to talk about home science. I might refer to it. I have a project. We found a new language that has been developed just in the last 4 generations in the backlands of Brazil in complete isolation. And so we have been studying that. And what we see there is that both interaction and uh, competence are important. Okay. And so the kind of structure, specifically an extended syntactic structure that furnishes one, a position that is the locus of elocutionary force, the speech act. Information about the relationship of the speaker to the addressee. Information about the speaker's commitment to the proposition. Okay. All this takes place high in the tree structure in the treetops. What does this structure look like? Okay. I'm going to adapt an idea in Krifka 2020 and many, many other important works by Manfred, combined with Spies and Tenny, and also taking ideas from Martina's work as well. So what are the properties of this tree-top structure? Yeah. In the first work I did, 2012 paper, which came out of a wonderful conference that Lydia Hegman held at the University of Ghent back in, I think it was 2009 or 10. And the paper came out in 2012 as agreements that occur mainly in the main clause. And there I was talking about allocutive agreement. That's where I introduced this idea that I discovered in Basque, thanks to Oyarzábal's work. There, I suggested that we can define the treetop structure in terms of two classic works. One is Hodge Ross's on declarative sentences, and the other is Emmons' Root and Structure Preserving Transformations. This is his 1969 MIT dissertation. Although these two works deal with distinct phenomena, we will see that after we address the problems noted for each, they are about the same thing, properties associated with a treetop structure. Okay? Uh, these two works uh, were proposed, they were interesting, but lots of problems, as I will note, having noted for both Ross and Emmons' work, such that they have basically been set aside, and we talk about these works mostly as a like a historical relic. But what and also they have never been sort of connected together. What I'm going to suggest is that once we deal with the problems that have been pointed out, that these two works, in fact, are talking about the same thing, and it's about the treetop structure. Okay, so you know this already, but Hadros performative hypothesis based on the study of performatives, speech acts in Austin. And so what Ross suggested is that for a declarative sentence like prices slumped, you have this superstructure, which now I'm calling the treetop structure. Uh, you have prices slumped. That's the sentence that is actually uttered. But above that, you have I, the speaker, you, the addressee, and a performative verb. In this case, uh, this is the English declare. So when you say prices slumped, the real meaning of that sentence is I declare to you prices slumped. Okay? That represents the speech act of the utterance, which Austin convincingly showed accompanies pretty much any expression uh, in uh, in conversation. So Ross wanted to map Austin's idea of speech acts into the syntax. Yeah? Very much like what we are trying to do today. Uh, Turning to Emmons' work, his conception of root is going to play an important role. Uh, what he, what Joe Emmons suggested is that there is the idea of root, and root has three different syntactic environments. Okay? Root will mean either the highest S in a tree, that's the main clause, an S immediately dominated by the highest S, we'll see what that is, or the reported S in direct discourse. Okay? What Emmons argued is that these are the three environments, the root environments, where what he called non-structure preserving transformations occur. Okay? Non-structure preserving transformations are just sort of, simple definition, are transformations that once you apply it, you cannot apply any more rules to it. So you're stuck with the output of this transformation basically giving you the root clause because you cannot modify it anymore. So one kind of non-structure preserving transformation is negative constituent preposing, where you take a negative element and prepose it to the head of the sentence. So never had I had to borrow money. That is NCP, where never has been preposed. Okay? That is a non-structure preserving transformation. And as you can see, this one is in the first environment, the highest S, the main clause. You can also have B, because never had I had to borrow money, I have a lot saved. Here, the because clause, the adjunct clause, is the second environment. S immediately dominated by the highest S. The highest S is the main clause, I have a lot saved. And hanging off of that is this adjunct clause, because never had I had to borrow money. That fits the second definition of root, and so you can have this negative constituent preposing. That's a root. And finally, C, John said that never had he had to borrow money. Okay, this is the third environment, reported S indirect discourse. Unlike A through C, D, the fact that never had he had to borrow money is well known. is just to be unacceptable because it does not fit any of the three environments for the root. Yeah. Okay, so root is what Emmons suggested as the environment where non-structure preserving transformations occur. So going back to Ross, a number of people, starting with Lewis and also George Lakoff, pointed out that an immediate and technical problem with Ross's proposal. Okay? If you recall, Ross suggested that the declarative sentence "prices slumped" uh, has the structure "I declare to you prices slumped." Okay? I declare to you is a representation of the Speech Act. But as Lewis originally pointed out, these two have very different truth conditions. Okay? Prices slumped is true if prices slumped. But I declare to you prices slumped is true if I made this declaration. Okay? It doesn't matter whether prices slumped or not. Okay? So it's a very different uh, meaning, and so they cannot be the same thing. This is a very powerful argument that we're going to address. Actually, Krifka addressed it by coming up with an alternative to postulating performative verbs, mental verbs like declare. Okay? Uh, Ross also gave evidence that there is a higher structure where you have speaker representation, for example, and the kind of evidence, you saw this from Prita's lecture, has to do with anaphor like himself. In 6, Tom believed that the paper had been written by Anne and himself. Okay? In this kind of structure where the anaphor occurs in conjunction with something else, the anaphor is not local, but it can find an antecedent in the next highest position, the subject. Okay? And so in this case, Tom believed that the paper had been written by Anne and himself, but not herself, myself, yourself, because himself refers to the higher subject. And then Ross points out the following: the paper was written by myself, but not himself, herself, yourself, which Ross argued is an indication that there is a first person speaker above this sentence, the subject, just as we saw with 6, that is the antecedent of myself, okay? But not himself, herself, or yourself. Okay? So um, that's the kind of argument that you find uh, in Hajaros's 1970 article. The problem with this is that these uses of anaphor more closely resemble what in the field are called logophors. Okay? Logophors have as their antecedent not just the subject of the higher clause, but source, the one who makes the report, self, the one whose mind is being reported, and pivot, the one from whose physical point of view the report is made. This is Peter Sell's famous 1987 LI article. Also, it turns out that not only do you have first person and also second person, which Ross points out, you have very commonly third person logophors. Iwi in the first, as far as I know, the first major work on logophors by Nick Clemens. This is an African language in 1974. You find lots of third person logophors. And so this argument of logophors does not seem to work. So you have two problems. The technical problem with truth conditions, and also the data itself does not seem to point to just speaker and addressee. Okay, so that's for Ross. For Emmons, you saw that Emmons proposed the root with the three environments, high SS, S immediately dominated by high SS and reported as. Uh, just after Emmons completed his dissertation, Hooper and Thompson published a long and important article, 1973, in LI, where they took to task Emmons with really point by point counterexamples. So, for example, Hooper and Thompson pointed out that 8 is perfectly fine with the non-preserving, non-structure preserving transformation, negative preposing. I found out that never before had he had to borrow money. And that never before had he had to borrow money uh, does not fit any of the Emmons environment. It's not HISS, it's not main clause. Uh, it's not S directly dominated by HISS because this is a complement of find out, and it's not reported as. And so I mean, it's a pretty massive critique of Hooper and Thompson. As soon as their paper came out, um, Emmons' idea of the root um, was not really taken up in any serious manner since then. Although Joe Emmons himself, I give a lot of credit to Joe, he tried to address many of the problems that Hooper and Thompson raised in more recent works. Okay, so now we turn to the proposal. The proposal is the treetop structure contains speaker addressee phrase. It's the same SAP as um, speech antennae, but I'm just referring to it as speaker addressee phrase and sort of stay away from the fact that, uh, their SAP is speech act, because I like to stay away from that and just simply sort of call it for what it is. It's got to have a speaker, it's got to have addressee. And I'm particularly interested in motivating syntactically these structures. It also contains the commitment phrase that indicates the speaker's commitment to the proposition. This is Krifke's um, way of getting around the problem, the technical problem that was pointed out by Lewis, that if you posit something like declare, okay, like a mental verb, you get into trouble with truth conditions. And so Krifke gets around that by positing this commitment phrase, and we'll come back to that. And finally, the treetop structure has a distribution predicted by Emmons' root. Emmons used English examples like the ones that we saw, and the irony of this, the real irony of this, is that Emmons' idea of the root with the three environments was correct. Okay? He had the right intuition. But ironically, pretty much every piece of data that he gave, all from English, did not work to motivate his correct idea. But now we're coming in with a modern piece of evidence from things like allocative agreement, which occurs in the treetop structure, to show that the treetop structure distributes exactly along the lines of Emmons' root. And so this approach is very different from like the Austen-Gracian mentalist approach, replaced by commitment. And of course, Emmons' work. All right. So Krifke, Manfred suggests the following structure that you can see in 9. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 layers that he suggests. What he calls the act P, which is the locus, act phrase, locus of elocutionary force. Also, an idea developed by Frey and Meininger. And also Martina has similar ideas. The commitment phrase indicates the commitment that the speaker holds, for example, to the truth of the proposition in a declarative. Gertz has a very important paper that expands on this and others. And judgment phrase expresses the judgment of the speaker towards the proposition. For example, an adverb like probably uh, belongs in the judgment phrase because it reflects the speaker's judgment about the truthfulness of the proposition. Um, I took that, okay. I took, oops. Okay, I took Krifka's idea of this act P, commit P, judge P, and TP and revised it slightly. So the act P, I'm calling the speaker addressee phrase because that's where you find the speaker and addressee representations, as we found with Ross's proposal. Commitment phrase stays the same. I don't have a judgment phrase. Instead, what I argue is that what Krifka and Frey and Menninger and others have argued as part of the judgment phrase is really part of the traditional C system, the CP, sort of an extended CP that we find in cartography. So I wanted to keep it simple, and 10 is what I'm going to argue for, starting with a speaker addressee phrase. Uh, the structure that you just saw splits the syntactic structure into two parts. SAP, speaker addressee phrase now, and commitment phrase are part of the expressive component of the syntax. The C system or the CP is propositional. Okay? So C system is where you find truth conditions, okay? The basic semantics. SAP and commit P places this utterance in conversational context. Okay? So this is my sort of modest suggestion on how we can begin in small steps to unify form and function, as Stephen Gould asserted that we must do to get at the real truth of whatever phenomenon it is that we're looking at. Yeah. Frey and Menninger offer evidence for the judgment phrase based on Topicalization in German. Very interesting data. In one of the chapters of my 2022 LI monograph, I give an alternative analysis for topicalization that does not require postulating an independent judgment phrase. And on this account, topicalization is part of the proposition that is associated with truth condition. The CP system, in other words. Basically, going back to Chomsky's analysis of topicalization in his 1977 on WH movement, which was one of the first or early works on extended standard theory. Yeah. The way that I want to motivate first the highest phrase, the SAP, the speaker addressee phrase, is to use allocutive agreement, something that I pointed out originally in the 2012 article, thanks to Isabel. It's an agreement that agrees with addressee in person, number, and gender. Addressee. So it's not your traditional five-feature agreement that typically agrees with what's in the subject position, but here the agreement is with addressee. Okay? And all of this is part of a program that I put forth in my 2010 LI monograph, Why I Agree, Why I Move. And there, what I said is what I call strong uniformity, based on Chomsky's uniformity principle, that every language shares the same set of grammatical features, and every language overtly manifests these features. You see that for 80% of languages which have some sort of five-feature agreement, Okay? But the other 20% don't, like Japanese. So is Japanese an exception to strong uniformity? Uh, what I argued in the later works is that, in fact, no, that strong uniformity still holds. It's just in languages like Japanese, the agreement occurs not within the CP, but in the treetop structure in the form of allocutive agreement. But allocutive agreement is just like five feature agreement in having person, uh, number, and gender. Right? A very straightforward argument for allocutive agreement comes from Sultan Basque. It's a dialect of Basque spoken mostly in southern France. Uh, and it's a very simple paradigm. So you have I am going, he's going, we're going, they're going. You see they have different forms. First person, uh, third person singular, first person plural, third person plural. Okay, very typical uh, inflection. But the unusual thing about Sultan Basque is that along with your regular uh, agreement, you have another agreement that occurs on either K here or N. So Noah plus K or Noah plus N, non. K here in the middle column is second person masculine, colloquial. N is second person feminine, colloquial. So these are person agreements, but they're second person. They have also gender and also level of style of speech as colloquial. Okay? As you can see, there is no second person anywhere in the sentence, and yet these occur. And what Oyasabal pointed out is that this extra, the second agreement called allocutive agreement, is agreeing with addressee. Okay, so if you speak, so if you use K here, Noak, then you're telling uh, a male friend, okay, masculine colloquial male friend, that I am going, the speaker, I am going. Okay? If you use Zoan, then you are telling a female friend that he is going, whoever that is, he's going. Okay? So this is allocutive agreement. Uh, so this is another way to demonstrate allocutive agreement. You have A, B, C, D, all meaning Peter worked. Okay, Peter worked, Peter worked, Peter worked, Peter worked. Okay, but and you have two agreements, as we saw already. One agreement is consistent throughout the four. Uh, Basque is an allocutive, I'm sorry, ergative language, and so this is a intransitive verb, and so the subject gets absolutive. And so you have absolutive, 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 absolutive agreement. But along with that, you have allocutive agreement that varies from sentence to sentence. So to a male friend, you use the K, second person singular, colloquial, masculine, allocutive. Uh, to a female friend, Peter work, you use the N, second person, singular, colloquial, feminine, allocutive. To someone higher in status, this Z, second person singular, formal, allocutive. Finally, if you have plural addressees and you're talking to a bunch of people at the same time and telling them that Peter worked, there is no allocutive agreement because allocutive agreement is singular. Okay? Uh, so for D, you have to guess the level of style of speech. Right. So you can see that the allocutive agreement has person, second, uh, gender, masculine and feminine, also number, singular. The allocutive agreement is regular five-feature agreement, as Oyasaba argued, in the following sense. Okay. Basque, and this is true of all Basque, not just Sultan Basque, has a constraint, a restriction about agreement. Okay? First, Basque is one of those languages where agreement takes place with all arguments in the sentence. So there's subject agreement. If there's an object, there's also an object agreement. If there's an indirect object, there's indirect object agreement. So you could find three five-feature agreements in one sentence. There is one restriction, very, very hard and fast restriction across all Basque, and that is that you can only have one second person in a sentence. Okay, only one second per, also one first person as well, but we'll just keep it the second person. So in Basque, you can say something. In Basque, you cannot say something like "you saw yourself," because that's two-second person agreements. Okay? They have a way of getting around that. I think it's something like "you saw your head." Your head is um, sort of a symbolic representation of you, but it's third person. So you are able to get around the restriction of no two-second persons. Okay? And what Oyasabal points out that if you have one second person in a sentence, I saw you or you saw me, you cannot have allocutive agreement. Okay? Why? Because allocutive agreement is also second person, and by this restriction in Basque that you can only have one second person, allocative agreement is blocked from occurring because of a regular sentential second person, which indicates that allocative agreement is just a regular agreement. Okay? Regular agreement. It's not some odd, exotic agreement as some people have suggested, but it's just regular five-feature agreement. Okay? And so as a regular five-feature agreement, you need a probe-goal relationship. And so what I suggested in my 2012 is that the goal for the allocutive agreement is this addressee in the treetop structure. Okay? That is what the allocutive agreement is targeting. And then Oyasabal makes the following point. The allocative agreement in Basque has the same function and distribution as the politeness marking mas in Japanese. This is referring to a little squib I wrote back in 1987. So this opened the way for me to address the problem that I noted at the beginning of the lecture, the um, strong uniformity that says that every language, all 7,000 plus languages of the world, has the same set of grammatical features, and they somehow manifest these features. 80% of the languages, you see it. But what about 20%? Japanese falls into that 20%. If what Oyasabal says is true, then Japanese is not an exception to strong uniformity. Japanese has five-feature agreement. It comes in the way of this mass marking, and it occurs, the five-feature agreement just happens to take place above the CP. Okay? But it's nevertheless regular five-feature agreement as Oyasabal demonstrated for Basque. Okay? So let me get into the data a little bit and then I'll stop to see if there are any questions. So I'll show you a little bit of Japanese. The data is not very difficult. Okay? The verbal inflection mas is used when speaking to a stranger or sorry, um, an addressee considered by the speaker to be socially superior. So 17a, Hanako ate pizza. The verb tabeta is in the past tense, eat, pass. This has no mas. So this would be used to tell a friend, for example, that Hanako ate pizza. In B, the verb has the must form, the politeness form. So you would use this to tell, let's say, a teacher that Hanako ate pizza. It's been known for a long time that the distribution of mass is restricted. Shinichi Harada, back in 1976, observed this, but there was no uh, definition of exactly what the environment was, and what I suggested was that the distribution of mass fits exactly Emmons' root environment. So just to review, a root will mean either the highest S in a tree, an S immediately dominated by an highest S, or the reported S in direct discourse. And you saw the examples. And also the fact that Hooper and Thompson, 1973, gave point-by-point critique counterexamples to Emmons. Uh, if you look at distribution of mass, which I assume is allocative agreement, it gives a very strong empirical evidence that Emmons was correct with his definition of the root. So you have highest S, Hanako will come. Come has mas, kimas. S dominated by highest S. Because Hanako will come, please be at home. Because Hanako will come, kimas has mas, that's okay. Reported as indirect discourse. Taro said that Hanako will come, kimas again, has the mas form, and it's fine. But must cannot occur in complements of verbs like believe or deny, which are not root environments. So Taro believes that Hanako will come. Come cannot have must. It's just completely ungrammatical. Okay? So what we see here is that we, we're able to define root, I think, in a more intuitive way than what Emmons was able to do. And that is that root defines the domains where the treetop structure can occur. Okay? Uh, because the treetop structure has the SAP, specifically addressee, and addressee is the goal for allocative agreement. What we just saw is that the allocative agreement, mas in Japanese, fits exactly the three environments for root. Okay, that means that there's the treetop structure with the addressee that is licensing the allocative agreement. Okay, and then we have a very simple definition for root. Root is the locus of elocutionary force. Okay? Because, as Grifka said, that top structure that he called Act P, and I'm calling speaker addressee phrase, is the locus of elocutionary force. And so now we see that that structure uh, distributes exactly in the way that Emmons defined it as root. Okay? And this is very, very, I think, intuitive. Okay? Root is the full expression. Okay? And full expression, as John Austin originally pointed out, is accompanied by elocutionary force, a speech act. That's what we see with a treetop structure. Uh, in a recent article by Dak Hoan, he points out that Korean uh, supni, supnita, the politeness marking has exactly the same distribution as what we saw for Japanese. ISS, uh, S dominated by ISS, reported as indirect discourse, but not in 26. Iho said that it rained yesterday. This, I think, is indirect quote, so it's not reported S. Okay, maybe this is okay. So let me pause here to see if there are questions. If not, I'll maybe take a breather, a couple minutes, and then keep going to the next section. Let me.
Hello? I think we
Okay,
have
I'm
three
just going to scroll
questions.
through. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, you're audible.
Hello.
Yes?
Yes. I think we have three questions. And also raised hand. So I think the first question is like regarding the data.
Okay, someone
Okay,
needs
so
to mute the microphone. Sudipta, maybe you could try to mute your microphone. I can take the questions.
okay, okay, okay.
Thank you so much. There is another interesting question. Is it possible to say you saw yourself in the mirror in Basque? As far as I know, no. This is a grammatical restriction. So you can only have one second person. So you have to say you saw your head in the mirror. Could you explain the difference between these two environments, S dominated by highest S and S reported in direct discourse? Um, okay, good question. Very good question. So S reported in direct discourse occurs only under specific verbs. Uh, Say is the typical verb. Okay? It's not clear whether that's hanging off the top TP or it may actually be in the complement position of the verb say. It's just that semantically it's reported S, so it's okay. But S dominated by high SS, as we saw, and we'll see more of it, can be lots of adjunct phrases like because phrase, although, and so forth, which are not dependent on a particular verb like say. A very general question regarding treetops. In what sense is topicalization associated uh, oop, associated with truth conditions? Well, that's in fact the question that I asked of Frey and Menninger's work, where um, oh, I see. So it's in the CP. If you look at a topicalized sentence, this book John read, it has truth condition, right? It has a truth condition. Um, it's not necessarily that the topicalization gives you a different kind of truth condition. It might, depending on how you view topicalization, but it certainly has a truth condition that you could read off the CP structure. Okay, what is the relationship between the superstructure you mentioned and the split of the CP layer in syntactic domain? Can we consider your superstructure as the information structure of syntax? Well, so these are sort of two different ways of looking at this. My idea, and I think Krivka as well, is that the CP layer with the split CP, as in Ritzy, in the cartographic approach, is still within the CP. Okay? And what occurs above that, the commitment phrase and SAP or ACP, is outside of that split CP. Okay, this is something to be argued for empirically. Okay, I mean, you can't just argue on the basis of some notional approach. It has to be argued for empirically. I'm assuming that the two layers, the expressive versus the proposition, are two different layers. Okay. These are wonderful questions, by the way. And if you have further questions, let me know. In case of matrix clauses that have CP complement, do both CPs also contain a treetop structure, or does the matrix clause alone have a treetop structure? Very good. So, with the exception of possibly of the reported S, okay, um, in a biclausal structure of the type that Diotima is referring to, like, I believe that Mary will go to the party, it's only the highest CP that has a treetop structure on top of it. Because remember, the treetop structure occurs in Emmons root environments only. Okay, so a complement of a verb like believe, I believe that Mary will go to the park. That is not part of the root definition, and therefore you would not expect a tree top structure to occur there. Semantically, is the meaning encoded syntactically above CP necessarily use conditional as opposed to truth conditional? For example, it cannot be challenged by that's not true. If so, does the treetop semantic content live in the expressive dimension rather than in the propositional truth conditional dimension of meaning? Um, so the treetop structure, um, in its simplest form, does not have truth condition. You just have the speaker addressee and the speaker making commitment to the addressee of the truthfulness of P. P is the CP. Okay, so the truth conditions uh, are within the CP. Okay, you might argue, particularly with a commitment phrase, that maybe there is some that you can negate commitment. I can see people arguing for that, but the simple cut is proposition with your typical standard truth conditions and the treetop structure, which is more about locating that proposition in conversation. Right? Again, it's got to be empirically argued in either direction. Okay? Um, what is the relationship between the superstructure you mentioned and the split of the CP layers? Okay, I think I answered that, right? Yeah, same. Okay. Wonderful questions. I see that you're paying attention. I appreciate that.
I think we also have a raised hand. I think three raised hands. So I think Yongho, if you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Do we have the time for another question?
Go ahead.
Okay, so my question was about English, please. And the way you would use please would be, could you please pass the salt? And we know there's a designated syntactic position for that because you can't say something like, could you pass please the salt? But another way to say that would be, could you pass the salt, please? And I was wondering if those two pleases were the same thing or a different thing. And I arrived internally at the conclusion that they're different because only the please at the end can be further modified, like, could you pass the salt, pretty please, with the cherry on top? But the please, that sentence internal can't be modified like that. You can't say, could you pretty please with the cherry on top pass the salt? And I would need English speakers to corroborate this claim. But under with our syntactic structure right now, where would those two pleases um be living in? Was the question.
Okay. I have not thought about please. Others have. I do know that uh, items that may be depending on treetop structure can occur very low in the structure. It's sort of mysterious. Like your first example with please, which occurs underneath the subject. Okay? Uh, but if anything like what we're thinking is right, then it is somehow dependent on the treetop structure. So one test to see is that can these please occurrences occur in non-root environments. So that's something to test. I'm not going to do that right now on the run, but those are the kind of tests to see if even the low occurring please uh, is requiring the occurrence of the treetop structure. Okay, good
Thank you.
question. Uh, so Shoichiro makes a very good observation. I refer to Yamada's uh, 2019 Georgetown dissertation about SAP, and it is true that Akitaka postulates SAP in subordinate clauses. But in my work, SAP is usually not embedded. Okay? It is true. Akitaka does that. I have an alternative analysis of his data that led him to postulate SAP in embedded clauses, sort of based on analysis of Magahi by Alok and Baker. And so let me just note that uh, there's an alternative to Yamada's approach. Okay, let me take up. There's the two layers of the sentence beyond CP and below CP are similar in their properties, like the lexical functional categorical dichotomy. Oh, that's an interesting question. So, if I understand this correctly, is uh, the propositional layer sort of same in some important sense as the expressive structure? And I think the answer is yes, in the following sense. Okay, the expressive structure, the treetop structure, is part of syntax, so it is subject to all of the conditions uh, that we know for syntax. Okay, it has a treetop structure. It has a very familiar hierarchical treetop structure. It also licenses agreement. Okay? It may not have all of the properties of the propositional part, the CP part, because like you don't have verbs that assign theta roles and things like that. But in the most essential sense, the treetop structure is part of syntax, so it's subject to all of the uh, restrictions that you find with syntax. Um, Let me take up a couple.
I think we have two more raised hands.
Okay,
So, Yukiko, if you can ask your question.
okay.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I might have missed some things earlier, but my general question, this is like really general one, is that the judgment, like when if we take those like say honorific forms and stuff as kind of an agreement in the expressive part, but the sentence is never as bad as like say like syntactic, like, like a five feature agreement mismatch, right? In case of like, say, like if you use a polite form or non-polite form, and they're much milder, and it's a little bit different feeling from like felicity, infelicitus, like sentences difference either. So I mean, at best, people think like you're rude or you misjudge the context, right? So if there are like same syntactic agreement, just like a five feature agreement, how does that work? Like a judgment level.
Yeah. So two things to say. This kind of fluctuation in judgment is very typical in syntax, right? Not just with treetop structure, but you find in syntactic work what someone marks as star, others may judge not so bad. It's just the nature of our work. Uh, Judgment involves lots of complex things, and we still have a long way to go, Yukiko, in understanding this data. Okay? Um, I remember when I was working on numeral quantifiers back in the 1980s, it took me like 6 months to really understand all of the factors involved in judgment of numeral quantifiers. It was then that I was able to, put out a piece of work about it. Same with allocative agreement, right? Uh, there are ways to make it better. I agree. Um, if you put honorific on some of these, it sounds better. And there seems to be something going on with honorifics in combination with the must form that is licensing must where you would not normally expected. Okay, so there's someone cutting my grass outside the window, so there may be some noise there. Okay, so you're right, but I don't think that necessarily negates the arguments here. We just so too, it's just nature of our task that judgments are very tricky. And second, we still have a long ways to go in understanding this data. But what I can tell you is that, I have been working on this for over 10 years, and I have checked with a large number of speakers on these judgments. And so for the time being, until someone shows me otherwise, I will go with these, but in the hopes that other people will come in and sort of clean up the data so that we can have much sharper judgments. Yeah.
I meant like the judge. I didn't disagree with the judgment itself. I think there is like clear yes and a no for that. But when you get the say honorific form when it shouldn't be honorific form because of this the addresses, the reaction is not like, oh, you made a mistake type things, right? So that's the part I was kind of wondering about because that's not the case with like syntactic mismatch.
So that's more pragmatic.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. One more, and then I better get back to
Yeah,
my
I
talk.
think we have one
This
more
is more
raised.
fun. By the way, this is more fun than giving a straight talk. But is it Sneha?
Yeah,
Sneha.
so I'll keep it short. It's just about the data that you showed about Japanese, and I was curious, like, if Japanese has that subject politeness, say X ate pizza, where X is also someone formal, or you'll have a polite marker for that person, except for just the addressee. Say both of these are elders, and I'm talking about them. So
Yes. So you're pointing to a very interesting parametric difference among languages with allocutive agreement. Okay. Some languages are sensitive to not just the addressee, but to the subject, as you just pointed out. Japanese happens to be a language where that's not true. Okay? So you can tell your eminent professor that a dog is eating, dog food, and that's okay. But apparently in some languages you can't do that if you use the allocutive, and you can use the allocutive, the must form to say the dog is eating dog food. But in some languages, the subject also has to be someone of a socially higher status. Okay, thank you. Wonderful question. So let me get back to my talk. I have 40 minutes. By the way, if you have further questions or comments, you can ask at the end if I have time left, or you can email me. I'll be happy to correspond with you. Okay, so Korean has the same. So if you look at what we are now calling allocative element across lots of languages, you find that they occur exactly where you expect them to occur at the highest point in the sentence. So Korean, supinita, the politeness form, occurs at the end, presumably, at C head. Korean is head final, so that's as high as you can put something. Thai, same thing at the end, and Tamil at the end. So these are highest level, which is exactly because they're looking for the addressee in the treetop structure. So they have to occur as high as possible in the pronounced syntactic tree to be able to find the addressee in the treetop. Okay. The problem occurs with Japanese, and this is something that Yamada pointed out. In Japanese, unlike those Thai, Tamil, and Korean, the must form occurs quite low in the structure, okay? As in 30. here you can see that the must form occurs not only under tense, but under negation, which is very low. Okay, if you go with Pollock's 89 analysis of negation, negation is somewhere between VP and TP. And so the must form, that's the natural place for must to occur. If must is dependent on addressee in the treetop structure, which occurs in the root, okay, it's got a long way to go. It's got all of this structure that it has to somehow get through to get to the addressee. Okay? And that is not something you would expect of agreement, because agreement is local. Okay? Few exceptions of long distance agreement, but they have been shown to follow locality with further analysis. Okay? So what's going on with must? Well, as Yamada pointed out, there's something very interesting that happens in Japanese when you insert must. This what I call sequential allomorphy. So 32A and B mean didn't the package arrive? Okay, you have package as the subject, and then arrive, negation, na, past tense ta, and this interjection and a Q particle. Okay, that's your colloquial sequence. As soon as you stick in must way down here, then everything changes above it. Negation form changes from na to en. The past tense form changes from ta to deshita. And the introduction changes from daro to desho. Okay. Ka stays the same because ka doesn't have allomorph. Okay. What's happening, apparently, is the following. Okay. First of all, as Yamada points out, the reason why must occurs so low is for historical reasons. Okay. Must in the Edo period used to be object honorific agreement. Okay. So you agree with the object. So it occurred in the verbal in the VP. Makes sense. But across time, it changed from object honorific to allocutive. And now, instead of looking for the object, he has to find the addressee in the treetop structure. What we just saw is that must now contains this allocative phi feature, and this phi feature moves up the tree to negation, turning negation from na to n. It moves up to t, turning ta into deshita, and to mod, turning daro into desho. Okay, this is sequential allomorphy. This is quite striking. I don't know that I've ever seen allomorphy that takes this form. That's a separate argument. And in fact, it goes up all the way to the treetop structure. But the really dramatic data is the sequential allomorphy that shows that Moss introduces an allocative phi feature that has to find addressee in the treetop structure. And so it just goes up the elevator, changing the morpheum shape na, ta, daro into en, deshita, and desho. Okay? Right up to that level. I have a graduate student at MIT who's been looking at a dialect of Japanese, Okinawan. Okinawan apparently does not have this sequential allomorphy. So if you put in the allocative agreement, what is must in standard Japanese, abi la in Okinawan, it does not change the shape of the morphemes above it, unlike standard Japanese. And so what Cooper is arguing is that Okinawan is taking advantage of another way for agreement to take place. Okay, so that's an ongoing. Um, there are other things about allocative agreement that some of which Prita talked about. So languages often have dedicated morphology for allocutivity. Japanese mas, Korean spinita, Thai this, and Tamil this. But in other languages, others co-opt morphemes for this usage. This is Margaret Wang's work, Margaret from MIT. Plural marking is one such morpheme that's co-opted because it is presuppositionally weaker of the two. You see this in French, tu veux, singular tu, plural vous, but vous is also used for politeness, even when it's singular. When Margaret Wang says plural marking is presuppositionally weaker, she simply means that singular refers to one, whereas plural refers to two, three, four, or more. Okay, so it presupposes a weaker set, and so it as a sort of presuppositionally weaker member of the pair, it sometimes gets co-opted, and we see this in Punjabi. This Kaur Yamada's, I think it's glossa work. So Punjabi has singular and plural allocutive marking. Okay, allocutive marking. This is colloquial. Okay? Singular. Okay, Aman is reading a book, and singular jet. You would use this to tell a teacher that Aman is reading a book. The plural allocutive is also used for honorific addressee, okay? Because it's the propositionally weaker of the two. Right? You find this kind of effect as well. It's something that you find in a regular five-feature agreement, which you also see in allocutive agreement. There are cases, there was a question about Yamada's positing SAP in subordinate clause. I think he was also looking at this. Allocative agreement occurs freely in subordinate clauses, Magahi, which Prita has already talked about. An Eastern Indo-Aryan language spoken in the state of Bihar in India has an allocative system with a three-way distinction along a neutral register. And you can see that it occurs happily in complement of language like verb like thought. Okay, Santi thought that Banti went to run. This has allocative agreement in the subordinate verb. This is no honorific allocative agreement, so said to a friend up here. This is honorific allocative agreement on the subordinate, said to a parent, and then very high honorific, I'm sorry, right here, said to a teacher or king. In this language, I guess teachers and kings are natural set. It's a very nice language. Yeah. um, why is it the Magahi allows allocative agreement in subordinate clauses? It apparently occurs quite freely, as long as the subordinate clause, I think, is tensed. Okay. Another thing that Magahi has is the indexical shift. Yeah. Very familiar to people who work with South Asian languages. So indexical shift. John thinks that I am smart. Okay, you have I, first person, but the I here can be either the speaker, which is sort of default, or John referring to the subject. And here you have a shift in index where I, the first person, refers to John. Another example, Santi told Banti that I, So you, here you have possible shift in two places. I can be Santi if it's shifted, or the speaker, and you can be Banti if it's shifted, or the addressee, the default. Okay? So the shifting is optional. Okay? But as Alok and Baker point out, indexal shift is typically analyzed as an operator in the spec of CP that is coindex with the higher DP, the antecedent, and with the lower element DP that is going to shift. Okay? So if you have an operator, allocative, what's called monster operator, then U becomes whatever this DP is. Okay? If you don't, then you stay as second person. It turns out that in Makahi, the allocative agreement is licensed by this monster operator. So we saw that this U, if it's shifted, is the DP, but if it's not shifted, then it stays U. But as soon as you stick in allocative agreement on the verb, the lower verb, then you're forced to shift. And an example is, so Sante told the professor that Ram saw you, and you have in the embedded verb allocative agreement, it's high honor agreement. Here, the you has to be the professor and not the second person you. Okay? Second person you. Okay. And unlike earlier examples where you could either shift or not shift, as soon as you stick in the allocative agreement, you have to shift. Okay? Which shows the allocative agreement is dependent on the monster operator, on the operator for index called shift, and because the operator here for index called shift occurs in spec CP and not in the treetop structure, and CPs can occur all over the place, which means that allocative agreement in Makahi can occur all over the place because what licenses allocative agreement in Makahi is the operator occurs in spec CP. Okay? This data has been misunderstood by some people as showing that allocative agreement can occur freely in subordinate clauses in all languages. That's not true. It depends on what is licensing the allocative agreement. In languages like Japanese and also Basque, allocative agreement is licensed by the treetop structure. Okay? And so it is limited to the root environments. High SS, S directly dominated by high SS and reported S. Okay? In other languages, like Magahi, the allocative agreement is licensed not by the addressee in the treetop structure, but by the indexical operator, which occurs in the CP domain, the propositional domain. So in Magahi, the allocative agreement can occur freely in subordinate clauses. Finally, I just note that even in Japanese, Japanese also has a Magahi style subordinate clause, allocated marking. Okay? But it's in a very special environment that has to be licensed in a way that you don't find with root allocative. Something that Asako Uchibori pointed out in a couple of papers. So I won't go through with that, but it's very important that we understand the data. We don't just take one thing and say, it's true for everything. You have to be very, very careful in analyzing your data to make sure that you're taking everything into consideration. Okay, so we saw the data with allocative agreement to license the address C. Now we are going to look at the data that licenses the speaker. Okay. One piece of evidence that there is a speaker representation in the treetop structure comes from Romanian. Romanian has sentential particles that occur very high in the structure, something that Virginia Hill pointed out. And we have a paper, Miyagawa and Hill 2023, in LI about this. So here's an example of a sentential particle in Romanian, high. Like, let's start the work. Okay? This occurs very high in the structure, above the subject, in fact, above CP. And Virginia Hill argued in an earlier work that this high occurs in, as I think, head of the speaker phrase. And as you can see, it inflects for agreement, first person, plural. Okay, so that's like allocative agreement. You have agreement, which is a very clear evidence that there is a person, in this case, first person, that's in a treetop structure. Okay, you saw from Prita's presentation earlier today that in Bangla, there's an evidential marker for speaker. Yeah? A very nice argument for the speaker and possibly also addressee comes from Newari, a Tibeto-Burman language. Again, Prita talked about this. Newari is a language spoken in the Tibetan region. It's a Tibetan-Burman language. It has this thing, verbal inflection, that is now, I guess it's called egophoric inflection. It goes like this. It can be conjunct, the past or non-past. It can be disjunct, past or non-past. Okay? So if you take the sentence in 45, she said that she went there. Okay, you have two occurrences of this pronoun, she, and in the matrix, and she in the subordinate. And the subordinate verb has the conjunct inflection, the egophoric. This conjunct inflection signifies that the two occurrences of she are co-referent, same person. But in B, you have now a disjunct marking on the same sentence, and this says that the two occurrences of she are disjunct. Okay, that's the baseline. Okay. It turns out that the egophoric marking occurs also on the main clause. Okay. In the declarative, if you have a first-person subject, I went there or will go there, you have to have the conjunct. But if you have the second person, you went or will go there, you have disjunct. If you have third person, she or he, went or will go there, you also have disjunct. Okay? As Ken Hill originally pointed out, who studied this, what this shows is that this egophoric gives evidence for the occurrence of speaker at the top, above the sentence. Why? Because here the subject is first person, I, and you say this conjunct, which means there's another occurrence of first person above the sentence, which will be the speaker. Okay? If you have you, second person, or she, third person, then you have disjunct because it is disjunct with the speaker I. Okay? So this is really the dramatic demonstration of the occurrence of a speaker. There's a little bit of twist to this, in that if you look at questions, then you have a sort of a flip. With question, Did or will I go there? Now you have disjunct. Will you go there? Second person, you have conjunct. Did or will she go there? You have disjunct. In questions, it looks like the egophoric is showing that there is a second person, addressee, in the treetop structure. Okay, how we deal with that? Vera Zhu, who talked about this in her 2017 NYU dissertation, she adopts Spies and Tenney's idea of seed of knowledge, which occurs below what I'm calling SAP. And the seed of knowledge has speaker if it's declarative, because with declarative, it is the speaker that knows the truthfulness. Okay, that is authority on the proposition, the truthfulness of the proposition. And so the speaker, and so you found with declarative, it is the speaker, okay, that the egophoric targets. But with questions, that it is the addressee that is holding the authority on the truthfulness, and so it is the addressee that occurs in the seed of knowledge, and so it's the addressee that is targeted by egophoric. Okay. So the final point before I stop is, we've motivated the addressee with allocutive, the speaker with things like the Nerari egophoric agreement, and these are very good pieces of evidence, much more convincing than the earlier attempt to motivate the structure. Okay, but now the question is, how do we connect this structure to the propositional CP? Ross suggested that mental predicates like declare, okay, is what connects the two, but we saw that you quickly run into a problem with truth conditions. What Krifka suggests is that we instead of these mental predicate, the Alston kind of predicate, we instead turn to the idea of commitment, sort of social commitment of the speaker to the addressee. Okay? So this is the commitment phrase. And this is what he says. The commitment phrase encodes the notion that speech acts should be understood as an expression of public commitments. So for example, assertion, the speaker commits to the addressee of the truthfulness of P. Okay. It doesn't say anything about declare. It is the speaker committing to the addressee of the truthfulness of P. Okay. Directive commits the speaker to the goal of the addressee making P come true. This is open the window, imperative. When I say to the addressee, open the window, I am assuming that you will follow my directive, and so I am committing to the addressee making P come true, opening the window, and so forth. Okay? This is a very interesting alternate way of seeing the speech act, and it gets you out of the technical problem of truth conditions. Okay? And there is evidence for commitment P from many languages: Bengali, Chinese, Japanese, and Romanian. Let me, in the last section, give you a little bit of data from Japanese. Okay, so Japanese has the sentential particles. The two most typical particles are yo and ne. Okay, yo is often translated as Yeah, as an exclamation point, right? Or Hanako will come for sure. It's assertive. Net, one usage of net I'm referring to is the speaker trying to ascertain the truthfulness of P with addressee, and it's often translated as a tag question. Hanako will come, right? In traditional grammar, yo is often analyzed as speaker-oriented because it's assertion. Net is analyzed as addressee-oriented because it is the speaker trying to ascertain the truthfulness of P with addressee. Okay. Uh, but there's this fact that I think questions that analysis. Yo and ne can co-occur in the same sentence. Okay? Hanako wa iku yo ne, but order is always yo, assertion, and ne, the tag question. Never in the other order, ne, yo. Okay? If yo is speaker oriented and ne is addressee oriented, you would expect the other order. Okay, yo, yo as a speaker up here and ne as addressee, but that order is ungrammatical. Okay? What what we argue, Miyagawa and Hill, is that net is addressee oriented. Okay, that's clearly true. But yo, which occurs underneath net, is on the commitment phrase. And it's actually an evidential marker. Evidential marker. And we go through a number of arguments to show that this has to be the case. Okay? It also gets you out of another problem if you are committed to saying that yo is speaker oriented and ne is addressee oriented. That will mean that a sentence like 52 would have two speech acts, one assertion by the speaker and ne, which is trying to confirm the truthfulness. And there's discussion about whether a single expression, single sentence can have two speech acts. There are people who argue that in bias questions, like will John lift a finger to help with housework? Bias questions might have a hidden assertion, okay? But these are sort of on the margins. In most cases, a sentence has one speech act, and that's what you expect because what you're doing is that with an utterance, you're trying to get the addressee to do something with the speech act, to believe what you're saying, to answer your question, or to implement some directive. Right? And so by doing it this way, ne and yo in one sentence does not commit you to saying that this has two speech acts. When you say just one, ne, which is confirmation, and yo is what we're saying is evidential marker. So if you say yo, uh, you're saying that you have more evidence for what you're committing to. Okay? And finally, this is something that I just happened to run across, and I'm hoping that more people can do research on this. The sentential final particles like yo and net, and the autistic spectrum disorders. So ASD is characterized by abnormalities in social interaction and communication, including language development. Linguistically high-functioning ASD children rarely, if ever, use sentential final particles. So that's a very, very dramatic speech behavior. German children with ASD confuse the polite and familiar forms of addressee, sie and du, again having to do with addressee. American ASD children sometimes confuse I and you. Okay? They all have this property of somehow the interactions are difficult. Okay? And I ran across a couple of experiments that are very suggestive of what I'm arguing for in Virginia about ne and you. And it goes like this. This is the final point. A linguistically high-functioning child with ASD hardly used ne and yo, as we saw. But when trained for 14 months in 2 experiments, he was able to use both sentential final particles accurately. It was like this fun once a week um, playtime in which this child was shown to use yo and ne. And by the end of the 14 months, the child was able to perfectly use ne and yo in appropriate context. But after the experiment, the child was observed at home over several week period. And what the experimenters discovered was that the child retained the use of yo. There were 271 occurrences of yo, but only 4 occurrences of ne. I suspect that these 4 occurrences were simply repeating what the parent was saying with ne. Okay, so the child retained the use of yo, but basically lost the usage of ne, which at one point the child was able to use perfectly. I'm not sure exactly how to explain this in a clear way, but I'm suspecting that it has something to do with the fact that yo, I say, ne is dependent projection for its occurrence, as we saw with German and English. Children on the spectrum who are linguistically high functioning have problems with the addressee, confusing z and du or I and you, and so there's something about these children on the spectrum where the addressee does not seem to be fully functioning. And so net, which at one time was mastered, quickly disappeared. Whereas yo is not dependent on the occurrence of the addressee. And so it was retained even after the experiment. It's just a couple of experiments. I'm trying to see if I can connect with the ASD community. It's one has to be very sensitive about this, and so I'm depending on colleagues who work directly with the ASD community to see if we can get more information. If you have in whatever communities, localities that you work in have a chance to look at something like this, it would be great. Okay, again, but you have to do this with a lot of sensitivity. Okay, that's it. We have it's like about 6 minutes. Let me unshare. Um, and let me just ask if there are any questions. I know there are questions here, but it might be better just to see if you would raise your hand and ask your questions. Just scrolling through.
Yeah, I think we have raised hands. So, Yongo, can you ask?
Yep. Okay. The question I had regarding that last argument was that we know that in Japanese you have these overt morphemes for those heads called ne and yo. But has there ever been some kind of independent evidence that there's some vocabulary insertion occurring at the speaker head?
Oh, speaker head. I see. I see.
Yes.
Yeah. So yo is commitment phrase. Ne is addressee speaker phrase. Yeah, I do have some discussion of that in my LI monograph of other sentential particles that appear to be at the speaker head. Um, it's very tricky, and it's not as good an argument as what we see with ne and yo because those don't occur with other particles. So it's very difficult to motivate that. It's basically based on the meaning of it. But I mean, certainly in Romanian, you have very good evidence for that because you have the sentential particle that has first person agreement. But in Japanese, the speaker head for sentential particle is something that still uh, needs some work. Maybe in Korean, you have something that's easier to
Think
argue for.
about. Yeah. Thank you.
I think
Martina and also Yukiko. Martina,
Hi, thank you. I just have a quick question about the egophoric analysis because you start by saying it's evidence for the speaker in the treetops, but then you have to go to say, well, actually, it's the seat of knowledge, which is, in Spis and Tenny, it's a little bit lower. So I wonder whether it really is evidence for a speaker role. Like once you have to, admit that actually it's not always the speaker, how do you see that?
yeah. So it is true. If you just look at the declarative, you have a wonderful argument for the speaker, but as soon as you look at the interrogative, then you start to ask questions. What it's suggesting clearly is something like what Vera suggests that there is more complexity to the structure than what I suggested. Maybe something like Spies and Tenny, okay, or your structure, okay. Uh, but somehow you have to um, the declarative and the interrogative have somehow different structures in the treetops. How we capture that, maybe through movement, like Spies and Tenny. I know that you have the addressee above the speaker. Um, so maybe your system might be able to capture that better. I, I think Spies and Tenny would be very happy with this data. So, but you're right. It does show more complexity than meets the eye.
Yeah, well, you inspired me. I will talk about the egophoric data as well then. So
Okay. So you'll solve the problem.
I have something to say about it too, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
By the way, there are people at Chinese University of Hong Kong who are intensely looking at the egophoric data. They're in the field, I think, right now
Yeah.
near Tibet.
I have
getting
a
data.
native speaker PhD student who's writing her dissertation on.
Oh, you're kidding. Lucky you.
It's-
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay, I'll look forward to your talk. Yukiko?
Thanks. Just out of curiosity, Nate's address she had, right? I mean,
Yes.
the hearers, and but other things like politeness is also like in that domain. When both occurs, like how does it work? Because they're not in the same position, but then like if they're in the spec head or something, don't they have to establish something?
Yeah, that's a
Or
very good question. And these are exactly the kinds of things that we should look at. Interaction of things in treetop structure. So, given what I suggested that in Japanese, allocutive agreement is a five feature. It's an invisible feature that is introduced by mass law in the structure by keeps moving up all the way to the addressee head. I have evidence for that. So somehow the addressee head, when there's a ne, is able to have a split head that can host both net and five-feature agreement. Okay, but that's just describing the problem. I think that I think there's potentially some very interesting work to be done here with the allocative five-feature and these heads. Yeah, there's a very nice book review that just appeared on about my 2001 um, LI monograph in studies in English literature, in which they're very, very generous, very, very kind, but they do point to one problem that exactly has to do with the argument I gave about the co-occurrence of mass with a sentential final particle that they think maybe I got it wrong. And having read their review, I agree with them. So a lot of work, a lot of interesting work to be done. I think we are at the end.
Yeah, I
So
think we have a question in the chat box.
what's the semantic difference between a sentence with ishira and a sentence without it? You cannot capture it. Oh, you read my chapter. Yeah, so she or he is referring to another sentential particle. It's a kashira. And that's it's like I wonder. Okay. If you say John came, and then you put this shira or kashira, you say, I wonder if John came. And it's a feminine um, style. So uh, that has a feminine five feature if we are talking about five features. Uh, that's the difference in meaning. Okay. I talk about that. In fact, I think the criticism in this review, the one criticism has to do with what I said about the combination of Shira and allocative agreement. If you're interested, take a look. Okay, so we're a little bit over time. So
So thank you so much for this wonderful talk. Hopefully, we all have gained some intriguing insights from today's sessions. With this, we come to an end, and we are hoping to see you all for the next 2 days. Thank you.
thank you.